Welcome back to LA Catholic Morning here on Archangel Radio. I'm Todd Sylvester here with Michelle McAloon, Mike the Greats at the Command Center. On the line, regular guest Duncan Stroik, who is a professor of architecture at Notre Dame. As we continue the series going through cathedrals and basilicas here in the United States, now we're on the Assumption Cathedral in Covington, Kentucky. You can go to the website, covcathedral.com. Good morning, Duncan.
Hey, good morning. Great to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us. I was asking you before we came on, why is it, because I'm looking at the website here, and this cathedral is gorgeous. If you walked in, immediately it would draw you to prayer. It would draw you to higher a mindset, knowing that there is a God. And yet some churches you walk into, and the first thing you want to do is apologize to Jesus.
Yeah, it's a great question. Certainly, Covington is a place of transcendence. It's a place to take you away from this world. And I would give the credit to our great cathedrals and also to our not-so-great cathedrals, to the bishops who built them, and to the architects they chose. And it's really a team effort. And so it's partially up to the architect, it's partially up to the bishop, and I guess you would say the amazing thing is that in Covington, Kentucky, they built this amazing gem in 1895. Why would they do that? Cincinnati's the bigger city across the river, and Covington built this magnificent Gothic cathedral a la Notre Dame in Paris.
Yeah, how does that happen? And no offense, I mean, to the middle of Kentucky, it's almost like you took something from Europe and you put it down there.
Strong Catholic community there. A lot of German Catholics, if I'm correct, right?
Yes, it is very German. And a number of the churches have German names, and Muttergott, and it's a great German neighborhood. And I think, again, it's the vision of their bishop, Bishop Mays, 1895. That is a good time for architecture in America. There's a sophistication across the country, and also a desire to hire top architects who are well trained. And so he hired a Detroit architect who also is a French background, Leon Coquard. And so you have training, you have vision, and as you said, there's this desire to bring the excellence of Europe to America. We can do it. We have the ability, we have the talent, we have the money, and in this case, they succeeded 90%. There are some things they left off.
Okay, Duncan, start from the beginning. Explain to us what is a Gothic cathedral. And folks, when you close your eyes and you think of like your typical European cathedral, this is what the Covington, Kentucky cathedral looks like. But Duncan, explain to us, what is it that makes it a Gothic cathedral? What are its features?
Sure. Well, we like to think about the Gothic as occurring around 1100, going all the way up to 1400 in different countries. And it's a development, like organically. And we talked about the cathedral, your cathedral, as being based on an early Christian basilica, a main nave and two aisles, colonnade, and apse. And during the Middle Ages, we developed into a cruciform church plan. There's a desire for greater height. There's a desire for the ceiling to be vaulted, to be curved, and to be made out of stone or brick rather than wood beams. And so the Gothic really is a high point of the development of this desire to make things vertical. Often the proportions, the width of the nave, in this case, is 34. The height is more than double that. We saw that last week also with St. Pat's in New York. And this emphasis on making everything, you could say, fireproof, or making everything solid on the inside. And so we have the idea of the basilica, but now it's cruciform. It's getting more complicated. We're getting more colonnettes, and we're getting these groin vaults, or these X vaults in the ceiling. And then there are other things that happen. we think about the flying buttresses. Well, the flying buttresses are taking the wall, or it's kind of like someone holding something up, or like the pyramid at the football game. There are people down below holding up the smaller cheerleaders at the top, and so the flying buttresses are like the guys on the bottom holding up somebody at the top, and the flying buttresses are holding up the wall, and that allows us to get a bigger glass. Why do we want bigger glass? Well, we want but we also want the images from the stained glass. So this is the development of stained glass in the Middle Ages, and that's great. And then the other thing we don't find in the early churches is this integration of towers. So at first we build a freestanding tower, we build a freestanding baptistry, then we bring them to the church, to the cathedral, and they become integrated in the Gothic cathedral. Sometimes you'll have two towers on the facade on the front, and you might even have a tower in the crossing, right at the middle of the cross. So unfortunately, those were things that you could say, ran out of money in Covington, so it doesn't have the towers.
Okay.
But the Gothic is really a development of lots of things over hundreds of years and many architects. But think of it as a stone architecture, a vaulted architecture, pointed arches, and very tall.
Okay. I mean, and folks, if you get a chance, go on and take a virtual tour of this. It is a delight and a feast for the eyes, because not only is it architecturally beautiful, but the stained glass in it is absolutely amazing. It just, I mean, there's not one corner of this church that does not capture your imagination or your eyes. And a lot of it has to do with the light coming from these beautiful, beautiful stained glass windows. And I think I read the history. These are German stained glass windows. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, just like the people of Covington. Yes.
Okay.
And the Germans in America, the Germans really take over for stained glass production near the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century. And the majority that I've seen of stained glass in America is from a couple of big studios in Germany. Meyer of Munich is still around, and there's a number of other very fine, Zettler, some very fine German firms. And we imported the stained glass because they did it really well. Now, things that are interesting to point out about the stained glass in Covington, there's a lot of window, and the windows are divided by little muntins, little mullions that are made out of stone. So it's very fancy, very sophisticated.
Okay, and what's a mullion?
And then you have these scenes.
Okay.
The little division.
Okay.
Little division in the window that allows you to get a bigger window, and very fancy, very expensive. But these are really much bigger than you'll find in most. The walls are more glassy than you'll find in most European cathedrals. I mean, and the other point is, not only there's more glass, but there's more light glass. This is a brighter church than most European cathedrals, most French cathedrals. There's a lot of white glass that lets actual light in. And then the scenes are more for the modern taste in the sense that you can see what's going on from far away. There's a lot of great French and English stained glass. You'd have to get up very close to tell who the saints are. They're very small. So that's an interesting development. 1895, we're talking 500 years, 600 years since the development of stained glass. And the stained glass has developed into being bigger and brighter and also more natural light coming in. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, because if you've been to Notre Dame is actually very hard to see inside the church, because they did a candlelight tour and it was like walking in the blind, but it is because there is no light going into that church, and that blue, the famous blue that they talk about, the stained glass blue, you can't see anything in the church. And this is beautiful. This almost looks, it's weird. It's oddly modern looking because of because of all the light.
I think that's right. And so we see even in the Gothic a development because of the architects, because of the bishop, because of the taste, because of stained glass. Stained glass has gotten bigger. So the famous window there in the north transept is the, as you know, the Council of Ephesus, where something famous happened, and it's one of the largest stained glass windows in America, and the figures are very large. You can see them from far away, and there's figures down below, and there's figures up above of this great Council of Ephesus window.
Okay, but Duncan, explain to me this. Why is it that these kind of churches can be built in the late 1800s, and yet it just seems like today we would never build something like this?
Duncan does.
Yes.
Have you seen his? No, seriously, your chapel at St. Thomas Aquinas is absolutely exquisite because of, and you use some of these elements, don't you? Didn't you?
Well, thank you. Yeah. No, in our humble way, we're trying. But no, I think that our forebears, even in the 19th century, certainly at St. Pat's in New York, had that sense that we've arrived, we may be poor, but we have faith, and we're going to stick to our faith. We love America, and we're going to proclaim the faith, and we're going to do that through a number of ways, but through architecture. And they really were gutsy. I mean, these bishops were gutsy in a kind of a naive way. And then if they were lucky, and in New York, if they hired Renwick, who's one of the great Gothicists of the time, or in this case in Covington, they hired Coquard from Detroit, you hire a really good architect, and he's going to do his homework to figure out how to do this. He's never done a cathedral this big before. Renwick had never done a cathedral that big. But they did their homework, and they looked at great stuff, and they figured out how to do something majestic and then they figured out how to build it, which is even harder.
Don't you think this is truly the church of the immigrant, too? I mean, they come to this country. It's a foreign experience. As Catholics become more integrated into the culture, our churches start looking more Protestant. We start mainstreaming. I don't know if that's a theory or not, if that's true, until we get...
It's a good theory, yep.
Yeah, till we get to ugly, and then we have people like Duncan Stroik come along and start reviving our beautiful, true culture of Catholic culture and architecture.
Well, so it is true, as you said, it is true that we haven't anything like Covington, but we're trying. And again, it does take a lot of money.
Yeah, how did they afford it back then, Duncan?
Well, I don't know so much about Covington, but I think that it was really all hands on deck. Was a lot of time fundraising, and there usually are a number of wealthy donors who help pay a major part of it, and but lots of dollar bills from poor families. It also means, though, that like many great things, that at Covington they didn't put the facade on until 20 years later. They built the rest of the building, the exterior and the interior, but they couldn't afford the front, and that was actually done by a later architect, and that's the one that looks the closest to Notre Dame. So things take a while, and today we like to say that our buildings often will be paid for a third or even a half by major donors, and then the rest is filled in by thousands of people. And I don't know the story of Covington, but you see that in New York at St. Pat's, and it took a while to build.
Okay, have we had to talk about gargoyles yet? I mean, that captures a lot of people's imagination. And I read there were 32 gargoyles on this beautiful church. What is a gargoyle, and what purpose does it serve?
Yes, well, people love gargoyles, and that especially in the modern age. And in this case, the gargoyle is connected to this idea of chimera or beasts. Fanciful creatures, made-up creatures of the spiritual world, and the interesting thing is that this penchant for gargoyles, in part, stemmed from that great book, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and then what followed from it which is the restoration of Notre Dame Cathedral by Viollet-le-Duc. And Notre Dame had been modified by the French kings, but then had been destroyed in part by the French Revolution, which kind of calls to mind some of what we're seeing now, the destruction of statues and beheadings and things. So that happened at Notre Dame. And so this great book, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, inspired people to fall in love with Notre Dame again, and people started having a cry, let's restore it, let's restore it. And so Viollet-le-Duc came along, a dyed-in-the-wool Gothicist who loved and believed in Gothic architecture, not particularly Catholic person, and he restored it. But as part of his restoration, he would improve things or make things better or change some things back to the way he thought they were even earlier, in their earlier times. And one of the things that he did was he added gargoyles. So Notre Dame is full of hundreds of gargoyles, and most of them are by Viollet-le-Duc. So it's really a 19th century romantic kind of melancholy kind of, well, we use the word today, goth, a kind of a goth aesthetic. And so it's not really, there are some things that are gargoyle-like in the Middle Ages, but nothing like we find at Notre Dame, and maybe not even like at Covington. So it comes out of that Gothic revival love of the grotesque, the odd, the strange, the mystical,
Well, I tell you, folks, if you get a chance, take the virtual tour. It really is a feast for the eyes, and we're all going to take a road trip up to Covington, Kentucky. Duncan, it's always such a delight to have you on. We really appreciate it. Have a good week. We'll talk to you next week.
Can't wait to see you next week.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks,
all right.
Duncan.
And up next, we have Father Mateusz Rudzik on the Sunday Gospel Reflection, LA Catholic Morning.
My heart lives by the bay. Home is where the heart is, and my heart